Today we're going to look at the end of the book of Job, where God speaks to Job. A couple weeks ago we heard from Job and his complaints about how bad his situation was. Last week we heard about his friends and the bad advice they were giving to him. Today we're going to hear God speak and see what he has to say about Job's situation. The Lord affirmed his power in creation, his care for what he created, and the sovereign might that was required to keep the world orderly. We will note that God did not answer Job's questions or respond directly to his complaints. Instead, God revealed to Job an understanding of his mighty power and his sovereignty over all creation. This lesson then focuses on hearing God in the midst of troubles, responding with a continuing commitment to trust him. So again, Job is beside himself, and finally, after long dialogues from the three friends, God interjects himself into the conversation and says to Job that we got to talk. I have some things I want to ask you. Job 38, verse 1. The Lord spoke to Job out of the storm. He said, "Brace yourself like a man. I will question you, and you will answer me." So God is going to come and speak directly to Job about Job's situation. The only one that we haven't really heard from other than in the very beginning of Job is God. He has been totally silent. We heard Job speak. We heard Satan speak. In the very beginning, we heard the three friends. Now God gets his chance. The Lord spoke to Job, Job 38:1. Out of the storm, he said, "Where were you when I laid the earth's foundation? Tell me if you understand." Where were you when I laid the earth's foundation? Where were you when I created this? Tell me. And at this point, Job is totally like, he's in over his head. It's kind of strange because we tend to be so prideful and arrogant, and those are sins that are twins of each other, and they are sins that God absolutely hates. Pride and arrogance, because those things say, I don't need God, I can do this on my own. But here, God takes any that Job might have had and he strips it right away. Who do you think you are? Who are you? What kind of power do you really possess? Where were you when I laid the earth's foundation? And at this point, Job is totally speechless. What do you say to that? Who marked off its dimensions? Surely you know. Who stretched a measuring line across it? Surely you know, for you were already born. You have lived so many years. You think you're so smart. You think you're so wise. Then tell me these things. Where were you when I marked off the dimensions of the earth, of the universe? Surely you know. Who is it that stretched out the measuring line? Who did that? Surely you know, for you were born. You have lived so many years. You're so full of yourself, Job. You know so much. Well, tell me these things. The one thing that we don't want is to be questioned by God, because he has absolute power, absolute knowledge. And there are some fancy theological terms. He's omnipresent, which means he is present everywhere at the same time. He's omniscient, which means he knows everything. There's nothing that God does not know. And so he is asking Job these questions. And these are questions that the three wise guys, the counselors, the know-it-alls, didn't bother to ask Job. Now we go to chapter 39, verse 26, and this is in parts in 3 different chapters. Does the hawk take flight by your wisdom and spread its wings toward the south? Does the eagle soar at your command and build its nest on high? It dwells on a cliff and stays there at night. A rocky crag is its stronghold. Do you have the wisdom to make a hawk fly? Can you do that, Job? Can you make and command the eagle to soar and to make its nest way up on the mountain? Can you do that, Job? No. God can do that. There is nothing that God cannot do. There is nothing too hard for God. He is the creator. And in these days, we tend not to hear a lot of that. God is the one who brought everything into being, even Satan, and he has a purpose for everything. Although with mosquitoes, I'd be hard-pressed to figure that one out. But there is a purpose for everything. And so God is questioning Job, challenging Job to come on and tell me, how much do you really know? How much power do you have? Do you have the power to raise the dead? Do you have the power to go to a young woman, a virgin, and impregnate her supernaturally? Can you do that, Job? Of course, that is a future event, but those are examples of the power of God. We see the miracles throughout the Old Testament, the miracles in the New Testament. And there were Old Testament miracles. We tend to focus on the 4 Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. But there were Old Testament miracles. And the one that comes to my mind is from the book of Kings. I'm not sure if it's 1 Kings or 2 Kings. It is where the man has leprosy. I believe his name was Naaman. And he wanted to be cleansed. And so he called for the prophet of God. I believe it was Elijah. It may have been Elisha, one of those two, because they were at the same time, and asked the prophet to come and lay their hands on him so that he could be healed. And the prophet said, no, I'm not going to come. Here's what you do. Go into the Jordan River, dip down 7 times, and your skin will be like that of a baby. Well, when the man heard what the prophet had said, he got mad. You mean he doesn't even have enough time to come here and heal me? He's making me go into the river? And the servant said, what do you got to lose? You go into the river, and either you come out healed or you come out still sick, but you're wet. I mean, what do you have to lose? He went into the river, dipped down, and came up after the 7th time, and the leprosy was gone. There are miracles in the Old Testament. We just don't hear a lot about them. God has absolute power. And as we are going to see in the sermon a little bit later, he can even raise the dead. He can take human sinners and transform them into saints. He can make a new creation. And here's Pastor Vince. I'm preaching on that today. The thing is, I know what I'm preaching today. When he says that, I don't know what he's preaching. That's kind of funny when he does that. But God can make a new creation, and so he is challenging Job. From there it looks for food, and its eyes detect it from afar. Its young ones feast on blood, and where the slain are, there it is. Have you ever heard the phrase, eye of an eagle? They've got tremendous sight. They can see a mouse or another animal that could become prey to them from very long distances. And they can swoop down and with those claws grab it right up. Do you have the eye of an eagle? Can you see like an eagle can see? And again, Job is absolutely dumbfounded. Like, what do you say to these questions? And there are 3 chapters. We're only highlighting this. Chapter 38, 39, and 40. Where God continues to pepper Job with all of these questions about all of these things. Are the powerful on earth truly powerful? They may think they are. But can they compare with the power of God? Can they bring something out of nothing? And that's precisely what God did in the creation. In the beginning there was nothing, and out of nothing came something. God created the heavens and the earth. And no matter which science you study, the more you study, it becomes obvious that there was a creator. Whether you study the universe as an astronomer, or study down to the human cell, God is a masterful creator. And he wants Job to answer these questions. And Job is just dumbfounded. And I don't think any of us would do much better. The brightest, most brilliant human being possesses a tiny part of the knowledge of God. Just a tiny part of the knowledge of God. For he knows all. There is nothing that is unknown by God. He is an awesome God. The Lord said to Job, "Will the one who contends with the Almighty correct him? Let him who accuses God answer him. Are you going to rebuke me? Are you going to correct me? Are you going to tell me what to do and when to do it?" Try that one. Try to convince God that you're right and he's wrong. Lots of luck on that. Lots of luck on that one, because it's not going to work. Job, who do you think you are? Can you correct me? Can you rebuke me? God has absolute power. And the thing is that in the presence of God and his Spirit, evil must flee. Remember how Job got into this situation. In the very beginning of the book, Satan came to God and asked God for permission to put Job through the ringer. It was God who granted the permission to Satan to do to Job what was happening to Job. Now, Job didn't know that. That was totally unknown to him. That took place in the spiritual realm, and there is a spiritual realm. There are all kinds of things happening around us that we cannot sense because of our bodies, our flesh, and our blood. But if our eyes could be opened and we could see what is going on, there are battles being waged in the heavenlies between the forces of God and his angels and the forces of Satan and his demons. And remember, demons are nothing more than angels who have rejected God and been thrown out of heaven. demons were once angels. But angels are more powerful than demons because angels work for God. And God's power always overcomes. So he is asking Job, can you correct me? Are you going to correct the Almighty? Then Job answered the Lord, I am unworthy. How can I reply to you? I put my hand over my mouth. At this point, Job, who was described early in the book as being blameless, realizes how unclean he truly is. I'm unworthy to be in the presence of God. I am unworthy to answer you. I don't know what to say. The most brilliant person, again, has a minute part of the knowledge that God possesses. And we think we're all high and mighty. God has a way of humbling those who are proud and arrogant. And you might say that at some point Job might have gotten that way. Certainly not in the chapter we studied a couple weeks ago when he was on the verge of being clinically depressed, but at other points Job may have very well had this haughty attitude. And who among us has not said, why me, when all kinds of troubles come to us? It is human to say, Lord, why are you doing this to me? Why are you doing this? The response to that is that God allowed his own flesh and blood to die an unbelievably ugly death. God permitted that. Can God stop suffering? Absolutely. Does he stop suffering? Sometimes, but not always. There are times when he chooses not to heal. One example out of the pages of the New Testament is the Apostle Paul, who had this thorn in his flesh. There are some Bible scholars, Bible teachers, theologians, pastors who believe that the thorn in Paul's flesh was his eyesight. Remember, at his conversion, that he was struck blind. And when he went into Damascus, he was prayed for by Cornelius, and he was healed. His sight was restored, and it may not have been totally restored. Not that God could not have done that. He certainly could have. But it was a constant reminder to Paul of the miracle that had taken place. And we have some evidence of that where Paul says at the end of some of his letters, see what large letters I use to write. And the thing that we need to understand that while all of the epistles came from the mind of Paul, he didn't actually physically write them. And again, that could have been due to an eyesight issue. But when he did write at the end, he would say, see what large letters I use. I have a former parishioner who lives in McKees Rocks. I was at the First Baptist Church of McKees Rocks. She is legally blind. She has some eyesight. She can still write. But whenever I get a card from her, I don't have to look at the return address. I know it's from her because it's in very large letters, almost like a child would do. She's doing the best that she can. And so I know from personal experience of someone who has to use very large letters, and that's what Paul did. God has a way of humbling us, and he can do miracles. He does do miracles, but not always. I spoke once, I have no answer twice. I have nothing more to say. What am I going to say? What can I say to you, Lord? Then the Lord spoke to Job out of the storm. Brace yourself like a man. I will question you, and you shall answer me. Would you discredit my justice? Would you condemn me to justify yourself? Do you think you are better than I am? Do you think that you know better than I know? Are you saying that I am wrong in the way I do things? Try that one. Tell God he's wrong. It won't work. Are you going to condemn me? Who do you think you are to condemn me? The one who spoke into existence everything that you know. Who are you? Job is being absolutely humiliated and humbled. And there are some people I wish the Lord would speak to like this, to absolutely humble them. Because they sure could use it. Do you have an arm like God's? Can your voice thunder like his? An arm like God's. An arm that brings creation. An arm that does miracles. Does your voice thunder like my voice does? And when God speaks, it can be an overwhelming voice. Now, God speaks in a variety of ways. He speaks through music. He speaks through scriptures and lessons and preachers and teachers and evangelists. But God has a thundering voice that I myself will admit to you that your own right hand can save you. Look at Behemoth, which I made along with you, and which feeds on grass like an ox. Behemoth, what is that? It is a large creature. We don't have an exact understanding of what that could be, but it is something really large, like an elephant, or a rhinoceros, or even larger than that. This past June, actually on my birthday, I had the privilege of going to the Pittsburgh Zoo with my daughter, son-in-law, and grandson. Through the eyes of an almost 2-year-old, that is a magical place. And I remember seeing the giraffes and being amazed that their head is 18 feet off the ground. These things are huge. Or looking at the elephants, or reading the little plaque. If you go to each display, there are plaques. And the one for the lion says that their roar is so loud, it can be heard up to 5 miles away. That's a thundering voice. Who is the one that gave the lion the ability to do that? God. His voice thunders. He is an amazing God. Look at Behemoth, which I made along with you, and which feeds on grass like an ox. What strength it has in its loins, what power in the muscles of its belly. Who made these beasts? I did. Think of the power that they possess, the strength and the endurance, that a cheetah can get up to 80 miles an hour in very short amount of time. And keep that up. Think of that, 80 miles an hour. A cheetah can run that fast. And it doesn't take long to get up to full speed. I know a lot of times with cars, car buffs will say, well, how long does it take for your car to get up to 60 miles an hour? And the better the car, I guess, the quicker that is. The question you need to ask is, how long does it take to go from 60 to 0 when you apply the brakes? It's not how fast you can get it going that way, but how fast can you get it to stop? Who are you,